The Edgerton Bible Case, How the Separation Between Church and State Came to Be, and What It Means for Public Schools in the United States Today. To understand how the small city of Edgerton, Wisconsin became a touchstone for the national discussion regarding the separation of church and state, we first need to travel back in time to 1844 in the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The city was named by its founder, William Penn, who wanted a place where everyone could practice their own religion as they chose to. Unfortunately for Mr. Penn, 162 years later, this religious tolerance would be greatly tested. During the intervening years, from the establishment of the city to what became known as the Bible Riots of 1844, many Protestants living there had established churches, livelihoods, and social clubs. In fact, Protestants were basically in charge of most segments of Philadelphian society at the time. Then, new immigrants came to Philadelphia for the industrial jobs and other work opportunities. Most of these newcomers were Catholic. While the Irish Catholic immigrants were well known as hard workers, some thought that the Irish Catholics in particular brought seeds of conflict from the old country with them to the United States. In fact, the Scotch-Irish Protestants of Philadelphia had already formed an Orange Society in the 1830s to revive the quarrels from across the Atlantic Ocean. Other nativist, meaning anti-immigration and anti-Catholic articles and leaflets were being published and distributed during this time. It is in this context that sets the stage for what happened next to cause the riots. It was common in public schools in Philadelphia at that time for passages to be read out loud by the teacher from the King James Bible, the Protestant version of the Bible. The local Roman Catholic bishop named Francis Kenrick asked the school board to allow the Catholic students to read instead the Douay version of the Bible that was commonly used by Roman Catholics. He also asked for those students to be excused from any additional religious activities that might happen during the school day. The school board agreed to these requests. Unfortunately, this angered the nativists, as they chose to view this as a way for the Roman Catholic Pope to have influence in the public schools, or even to take the Bible out of public schools altogether. The nativists started speaking out and having meetings about it. One such meeting was held on May 3, 1844, and was loudly and physically interrupted by local Irish residents. The nativists fled. A few days later, on May 6th, the nativists returned in greater numbers to rally in a nearby market. Their rhetoric stoked the anger of the local Irish Catholics, and fighting broke out between the two groups. A young nativist man named George Schiffler was killed. The local police could not contain the rioting, which lasted for 2 more days. In the end, about 20 people died, mostly nativists. St. Augustine's Catholic Church was also burned down. People cheered when the steeple fell. Another riot broke out on July 6, 1844, a couple of weeks after a grand jury had blamed the May riots on the efforts of a portion of the community to exclude the Bible from the public schools, as well as inadequate law enforcement and the Irish Catholic residents themselves. After the riots, Bishop Kenrick refocused his efforts to establish local Catholic parochial schools rather than spend more time working with the public schools. Now we are ready to look at the Edgerton Bible Case and its influence on interpretations of the Establishment Clause since then. A few years after the Bible Riots of Philadelphia had blown over, Edgerton established its first school of a sort in 1848. It was a building that was also used for civic and religious meetings. A few years later, in 1853, the train depot was built, which effectively put Edgerton on the map. At this time, Union, meaning not separated by faith, church services were held there, as well as in the old schoolhouse. 3 years later, in 1856, the Baptist Church Society was organized, and a new 2-story building was built for the public school. Another 3 years after that, in 1859, St. Joseph's Catholic Church was built. In 1863, the Methodist Church organized, and its church was completed in 1880. In 1872, the German Lutheran St. John's Church was organized. The church was built in 1880, which included a parochial school. In 1874, the Norwegian Evangelical Lutheran Church was organized, which also included a parochial school. By the 1870s, most of the residents of Edgerton were Protestants, as had been the case in Philadelphia before the Bible Riots. Many of the first white people who moved to the area were of British, Irish, German, and Norwegian heritage. Many had moved from the eastern coast of the United States. Train had become the key to Edgerton's early success. The tobacco that was grown in and around Edgerton became its most important cash crop. Edgertonians grew good quality tobacco, and the harvested crops were stored in newly built warehouses downtown, ready for the buyers to have them shipped out on the train to be made into cigars and chewing tobacco. By the 1880s, Edgerton became known as the tobacco center of the world, self-proclaimed. In 1883, Edgerton officially incorporated as a city. Echoing the demographics of Philadelphia before the Bible Riots, Protestants were already well established in Edgerton, when suddenly many new German and Irish Catholic immigrants started to settle in the area in 1881. As was the case for Philadelphia 42 years earlier, in Edgerton, Wisconsin, it was common practice for public school teachers to read aloud to their students from the King James Bible. At that time, this was not generally considered sectarian, especially by the Protestant majority living there. So much so, in fact, that the Wisconsin State Superintendent of Public Instruction had already encouraged public schools in the state to adopt the King James Version of the Bible as a textbook. In 1886, several local Roman Catholic parents, including Frederick Wise, protested about the practice to the Edgerton Public School Board, saying that the readings contradicted Section 3, Article 10 of the Wisconsin Constitution, which forbade sectarian instruction in the public schools, and therefore violated the separation of church and state. They also stated their belief that the Douay version of the Bible was the only correct translation for their children to listen to. The Edgerton School Board heard their arguments and, unlike what had happened in Philadelphia years earlier, decided not to grant the Catholic parents their request. The board's reasoning was that both versions of the Bible were based upon the same texts and therefore were not sectarian. Also, the readings were teaching a universal moral code which benefited all students. The school board then suggested to the Catholic parents that their children could walk out of the classroom during these lessons and wait elsewhere while the readings were going on. The Catholic parents were angry that their request was denied, so they decided to take their case to the Rock County Circuit Court. Unfortunately for them, in 1888, the Circuit Court agreed with the Edgerton School Board that the readings from the King James Version of the Bible were not sectarian. This decision prompted Humphrey Desmond, the editor of the Milwaukee-based newspaper, The Catholic Citizen, to write articles in support of the Catholic parents in Edgerton, and he also raised funds for them to take their case to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. This time, the Catholic parents were successful, and on March 18, 1890, the Wisconsin Supreme Court unanimously overturned the lower court's decision. In the landmark case State ex rel. Weiss versus District Board, Bible readings in public schools were now outlawed by writ of mandamus, effective immediately. The Wisconsin Supreme Court wrote in their decision that reading the Bible out loud in publicly funded schools illegally brought together the functions of church and state, and therefore constituted sectarian instruction. Chief Justice Lyon said in his opinion, "In addition to the guarantees of the right of conscience and of worship in their own way, the free school district in which their children were to be, or might be, educated, were absolute common ground, where the pupils were equal, and where sectarian instruction, and with it sectarian intolerance, under which they had smarted in the old country, could never enter. Furthermore, certain passages read at the Edgerton School suggested the divinity of Jesus Christ, predestination, and eternal punishment. These ideas are not accepted by all religious sects, thereby showing Bible reading as sectarian instruction." The Protestants were now the ones who were very unhappy. They predicted moral and social decay in Wisconsin following the decision. Former University of Wisconsin Chancellor John Bascom berated the decision publicly at the state capitol building in front of a large group of people. The North Dakota newspaper, the Jamestown Alert, reported that Bascom sarcastically said, "If an instructor in a public school touched with tenderness should say, 'May the grace of our Heavenly Father rest with us all,' he would have come perilously near a violation of the organic law of the land. If inflamed with anger he says, 'Damn the stupid brats,' he has violated good taste, but he has saved the Constitution." The Edgerton Bible Case was later cited as precedent in 1963 by the Supreme Court of the United States in its decision to ban public schools from reciting the Lord's Prayer and Bible readings by public school employees in the Abington School District versus Schempp ruling. To this day, students may pray in school, read religious literature in school, and form extracurricular religious clubs at school, as long as none of these activities are disruptive and aren't compelled upon them by others. However, even though many of these laws were decided before I was born, they are sometimes ignored. In my own lifetime, in the 1970s, while I was in 3rd grade, I lived in a rural part of Tennessee. We stood to recite the Pledge of Allegiance as well as the Lord's Prayer every morning, along with the principal on the intercom, before we started our morning lessons. Every year, more tests of the Establishment and Free Exercise Clauses of the First Amendment are brought forward into the public arena. For instance, in November of 2024, the Texas State Education Board decided to adopt an optional Bible-based reading curriculum called Bluebonnet Learning for its public elementary and middle schools. Public schools in Texas that adopt this curriculum will receive additional funding of $60 per student from the state. Meanwhile, in Oklahoma, State Superintendent Ryan Walters announced in November 2024, "I'm excited to announce today that Oklahoma is the first state to bring the Bible back to the classroom. Today we purchased over 500 Bibles that will be put in AP Advanced Placement government classrooms across the state. We have the Bible, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights. These are foundational documents in our nation's history. Our kids have to understand the role the Bible played in influencing American history. It's very clear that the radical left has driven the Bible out of the classroom, which leads to a lack of understanding of American history. We will not stop until we've brought the Bible back to every classroom in the state." An honorable mention to round out these constitutional test cases would be Louisiana's Governor Jeff Landry signing a law to post the 10 Commandments of the Bible in every Louisiana public school classroom. It was blocked on November 12, 2024 by U.S. District Judge John W. DeGravelis. In each of these cases, the Christian texts being championed are of Protestant origins or at least Protestant adjacent. For instance, the 10 Commandments posted in Louisiana schools would have been from a specific King James Version of the Bible. The so-called Trump Bible currently being distributed in Oklahoma classrooms is an edition of the King James Version of the Bible. Former Secretary of Department of Housing and Urban Development Ben Carson is a Seventh-day Adventist and was an influential member of the Texas Bluebonnet Learning Curriculum Review Panel. It seems to me that the nativist movements from the last 2 centuries have been reborn today as Christian nationalism. Once again, these constitutional tests seem poised to bring a specific Protestant religious worldview into the public schools. And again, this seems to be a response against immigrants who may have other religious affiliations or none at all. Let's see if we can keep the invisible wall between church and state intact so that all of our students can learn in our public schools while having their freedom of religion or from religion stay intact. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Edgerton, Wisconsin's most famous events.